Whether someone is facing transportation barriers, a lack of safe housing, limited access to healthy food, or isolation, the WellSky Foundation is there. Together with the remarkable organizations we support, we are building vibrant communities and breaking down the social barriers to health and wellness. Be the change with us. The WellSky Foundation. WellSkyFoundation.org.
Hi, welcome. I'm so happy to be here with Caroline and Todd Harris. We are going to be discussing, chatting about diversity in the home. How do you discuss it with your children, and some tools and practices, as well as their own experience in community and with their family. So welcome, Todd and Caroline. I'm so happy you're here. Thank you so much.
Happy to be here.
Great. Thanks for having us. Yeah. I just want to start out with some context of introducing yourselves, where you grew up, what that community was like, what your experience was like there, and then maybe how that's transitioned as you got married, had a family, and where you are now. So either one of you can start.
Okay. I grew up in a predominantly white household and neighborhood. And I don't remember having conversations with my parents regarding race when I was younger. It was just modeled. My dad had a very diverse friend group. I grew up running competitively in a city track program, so the people on my team were my friends, and they were diverse. We had meals together, we traveled together, slept in hotel rooms together, so I was just exposed to it and didn't think anything of it. They were just my friends. I didn't meet Todd until college, and so I don't know.
Yeah, and so prior to college, I was, born in Minneapolis, Minnesota. My mother's white Canadian. My dad is African American. So, many times growing up, I was the kid that was too white to be black, too black to be white. And so I found myself trying to navigate interesting cultural situations as a teenage boy and a youth and a teenage boy. But I was lucky enough to have parents and, open-minded, open dialogue within the home, a mother who is an ally for all, but truly an ally to the black community, and a dad who grew up in the segregated and racist South. And so he was able to inform me as to what young black men and black men should look for and watch out for in society. So that type of tool or that type of upbringing provided me with the tools and the skills to navigate some of life. Once we met, we were lucky enough to have parents that were open and honest and sat us down and said, hey, we are fully on board and support this relationship. Just know that life will not be easy. And with that advice and that knowledge and people squarely behind us, we did set out to pave, life together and to your point, raising two, beautiful black daughters of our own in a world that seems to be ever changing, somewhat not for the good.
Yeah.
So.
Something I really loved that you had said when we were discussing doing this segment was I had reached out to both of you, and Caroline was just like, oh, of course we'll do it together. We're partners. We do this together. And I thought that was really great, especially you just celebrated your 18th wedding anniversary, right? Congratulations. Wonderful. A question that's highly debated in this space is, when should you start having conversations with your children about race, diversity, equity, all the big words?
As early as possible.
Yeah.
It started for us in the womb. We would read books, we would listen to music, just the conversations in the household, in our household, in our extended families And then once they're born, it's the baby dolls that you give them, or the characters that you bring into your home, or the TV shows that you're watching, or the books that you have, or the baby dolls and the color of their skin. When kids are little, they can see color, so they know the color of skin and appearances that look different, but they don't have a label for that. And then once they get a little bit older, they start to identify what their race is. And then they start to put a label to it. Is it positive or is it negative? And then when they get a little bit older, they know what their race is, but then how do they themselves identify within that race? So as early as you can, expose them to all different types of people.
Yeah, and we talk about it a lot, even to this day. Our kids are a little bit older now, 13 and 9, and we constantly have to remind each other that they watch everything. So even at a very young age, they're watching everything. And so, even if you're not having a dialogue or a conversation or pointing something out, you want to model the citizen that you and the world wants and needs them to become, right?
Yep.
So it's like actions speak louder than words.
And you raised your kids in Chicago, a much more cultural place than where we are now in Kansas City.
Right.
What is your suggestion to families that do live in predominantly white communities? Where do they find the opportunity, one, to be examples of that? You mentioned baby dolls, and I think something we discussed earlier I just want to bring up is that black baby dolls aren't just for black kids. Like buying your kids mixed race dolls so that they see it regularly. But one is like, how do you be an example of not just like showing diversity? That kind of feels like the earliest lesson to me as we're like having this conversation. But also anti-racism in that community. Yeah. So it's probably two different questions. Let's start with that. How do you exemplify diversity at a young age when you live in a predominantly white community?
Yeah. So like you mentioned, we raised our kids in Chicago, and so what we were exposed to was a lot of different culture. And we took the time to visit different restaurants, to visit different neighborhoods, to go to these different events. I would say living in Kansas City, which is predominantly white neighborhood that we live in, you're going to have to seek things outside of your neighborhood. So travel to neighboring towns, go to the events, visit the restaurants, find friends that do not look like you, and make the effort.
Yeah, I would even go a step further beyond just find. It's seek them out, right? It's the history of Kansas City is widely known. It's segregated on purpose, right? J.C. Nichols, redlined the city so that black people lived in a certain area and white people lived in another. And, there's a word often used in Chicago, and it's used in lots of urban environments. It's called gentrification. And gentrification can be for good, or gentrification can be for bad, right? And so, the point around that is saying, take your kids, take your family, embrace the cultural and ethnic differences in your very own community, and normalize the fact that, different doesn't mean different for bad, but different is beautiful and different is good.
Right. Yeah, celebrate all the unique differences.
There's
a whole world outside of Kansas City that you have to expose your children to.
Yeah. Yeah, not just here, but like when you travel, find it, all of that. I love that. And I hear you, like the difference between just find it. Like, you got to do the work.
Yeah.
You got to seek it out. I want to go down a whole tangent with you on gentrification, but I'm going to set it down. We can do it when the camera's off and focus on where we are now. I just want to talk forever. What are some tools out there that you think people should utilize to have these conversations with their family? It's intimidating. I think that's a fair thing to say. It's intimidating to have these conversations wrong. It's intimidating that you don't know how to have them. You have to do the work, like you have to seek the neighborhood. So is there some tools out there, whether it's books or online resources or people you think that you would point people towards?
Yeah, the first thing I would say, just as, the black man on camera, is don't be afraid of the conversation. Like, lean into the uncomfortable. It's just as uncomfortable for, the recipient, but know that if we're going to change the course for the collective good, you're going to have to find allies that will walk with you and have the dialogue with you.
Yeah.
That being said, we've, interestingly enough, like, as we were talking about this, we thought of like the internet for good, right? The internet can be used, superpowers can be used for bad, but boy, can they be used for good, right? And like, there's all these amazing tools that we have found through, this uprising, for lack of a better, that have been so amazing. So one that we love
is The Conscious Kid.
Yeah.
And you can find that on Instagram.
Okay.
Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man with Emmanuel
Macho
has been really informative. And Google, listen to the podcasts, read the books, study history, ask the questions. I think we all try to be politically correct, and we're going to get it wrong. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to say things that offend people. But when you come from a place of like, I'm curious, I want to learn, I'm not going to get it wrong, I'm going to apologize if I make a mistake, but I really care. That's...
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's like, we were talking about the site worldreader.org, right? Like, site with a plethora of books of kids and families that definitely don't look like yours, and they don't look like ours, right? Like, so expose and create these, short lists of tools. But beyond that, I think it's, radical empathy and create safe spaces. Like, clearly society hasn't figured it out yet. That's why we are where we are 400 years after, we started on this mission together.
Yeah.
So let's take it upon ourselves to be a generation that does better.
Yeah.
And to do better, you got to say more, and you got to say it louder, and you got to say it prouder.
Yeah. Being open to failing at it so we can all evolve and grow. I think we kind of tiptoed in this, especially early on when I asked the last question of Black family members, Black friends, Black community. There's a lot of conversation out there of, can I go to these people and ask them for advice on how to talk to my kids or where to begin? I did this when I reached out to you and asked you the question of like, is it okay that I'm asking you to be part of this conversation? What does that approach look like of reaching out to your Black friends and family and community?
So I'm going to lead this because my opinion is not necessarily the most widely accepted opinion amongst Black people. And that is that in order for us, we have got to be active participants in the solution. And that means we have to be willing and able and accessible to have conversations. Does it mean that we can carry the ball for you? No. But if we're not part of the conversation as we lean into and push towards a solution, then we can't be upset with whatever the outcome is at the end, right? If you look at where we are today, the systems that we're in today were established when we weren't part of the conversation. We weren't able to have an opinion, and we're all debating and fighting and pushing back against those. So for us to get to a place where we're all in this truthfully together, we've got to have a seat at the table, and we have to accept the seat that we're given.
Yep.
I was listening to a podcast recently. Brene Brown interviewed Austin Channing Brown. And Austin said something that I was like, whoa. She said when people who are white leave it up to people who are color to educate you, you are leaving up to people of color to change your heart and your mind. And I'm like, wow, that is such a big responsibility. And so while it's important for white people to reach out to Black people and listen, call your friends, check on them, listen to them, understand their story. But you have to take it one step further. You have to do the work. You have to read the books, listen to the podcasts like we mentioned, have the self-reflection, get a therapist, understand where this is coming from so that you can create the change within you. And that only happens by doing the work. You can't expect somebody else to do that for you.
Yeah, and one additive note to that is that the systemic nature of what we're talking about, it is big and it is deep rooted and it is heavy. Black people have taken the ball as far as the systems will allow us to. In order for change for good to happen on all levels, in society, in the workplace, at home, white people have to take the ball and be so fed up with the systems to change them, because they're the power brokers. They're in the place, in the position of power, and they've got, frankly, the upper hand here. And so we need allies to move the ball further at this point.
Mm-hmm. Having a black friend is not the work. It's not enough. You've got to do more.
Yeah, and I just taking that to, can I ask them, how do I speak to my children? Do you have any suggestions? I'm trying to do this. I'm intimidated. Mm-hmm. Like part of that is like, do your work, and then you can ask them a little bit.
Yeah.
But they're not supposed to do the work for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and conversations are, sometimes we even struggle with how to kick off a conversation at home. So I can only imagine if someone, it's not native to them, how hard that would be. It goes back to the model, right? Sometimes you don't have to say anything. Sometimes you do because, oh boy, did we see what happened with George Floyd? Or, oh boy, did we see what's happening in Louisville yet last night and today based on Breonna Taylor? So yeah, we should address those things. But there are some things where you don't have to say anything. You just need to do.
Yeah.
I think one way to have a healthy mindset around diversity and inclusion is to have those tough conversations, but also to remind your children that everyone is deserving of love and respect, no matter what, and that's important.
Absolutely.
And I think when you ask, like, how do I talk to my kids around it, is what is it? What is racism? And then ask them, how do you think that kid feels? Empathize,
Yeah.
And then, what can you do when you see that? And let them be reflective and have those little conversations, because it could be about the color of their skin, or it could be a disability, or it could be something. How can we be inclusive to everyone? And you can have those little conversations with your kids.
Something I want to come back to, because I kind of skipped over and you're bringing it back up, having those conversations, being an example is being anti-racist.
Right.
And what that looks like. I think it probably looks the same when your children aren't around.
Mm-hmm.
And I bring this up because you kind of brought up two scenarios. There's being anti-racist, and then there's just like recognizing and helping someone who isn't making the right choices and doesn't know it.
Right.
And can you go into that a little bit on how you, I would say our example for your kids, but really we're just talking about how you handle it, because I thought you were so eloquent in how you shared that.
Like I said, having a black friend isn't enough.
Yeah.
Are you the person that is going to the rallies, that are researching organizations that you want to donate your time and your money towards? Are you showing up? Do you vote? Like, are you showing up in a way that even if you have a black friend or not, that you are making an impact and a difference in this world in a positive way? And when you speak about it, can you speak about, like you've mentioned, how beautiful it is to be diverse, and it's not a negative thing, and to celebrate everyone's strengths? And can you talk about it in that way?
Yeah.
Instead of, oh, this is bad,
And
or unfortunate.
Sorry. I think that being anti-racist too, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on where you sit, is, there will be fallout for white people who decide that they will become allies and anti-racist, because there are people in your feeds and in your family and in the closet who think and feel a certain way about black people or brown people or LGBTQ people. Like, there are people that's a deal breaker for them. And so, like, you'll have to decide, is the betterment of my common man more important or of equal importance than what my second cousin thinks and feels of me, and if we're going to get together for Thanksgiving?
I was going to unfollow you on Instagram.
Yeah.
Right.
Or is it more important for you to be comfortable than it is for you to speak out on injustice?
It's interesting because I came into this conversation and we all know the questions I had prepared and all of this stuff, and it was supposed to come down to like, here's the books and here's the practices and all this stuff, but it really comes down to like, are you doing the work yourself? Mm-hmm. Are you showing up for yourself? Are your children seeing that? And you can give your children, and you should, diverse Barbie dolls and books and all of those other things, but it kind of comes down to, have you done the work yourself? Are you willing to show up? And to me, being anti-racist means I'm showing up authentically, and being authentic is really scary because you do get denied, but it's way better once you're there.
Well, you mentioned something when we were just chatting before, and that's the, difference that even our kids see, and how, I have to make a point to remind our kids that, yes, we live in this neighborhood, and, in the world sees us as quote unquote privileged, but you are still black, and therefore the world still sees you as the black woman or young girl, and so we have to remind them that we are still who we are, and that there are, their actions and the impacts related to those actions are exacerbated because of the color of their skin, and that's just our reality, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so, we spend lots of time, talking to each other around delivery, and should we bring this up? Is this a topic that should come up? No, we should let that one go, simply because we're still trying to navigate raising kids in an ever-changing world too.
Yeah, and we're not going to get it right all the time.
The one thing I'm not a parent personally, but the one thing I constantly hear is like, you figure it out as you go, no matter how many tools there are. And that this is in that your daughters go to a school that's predominantly white. They have to be having friends that are having conversations with them, either good or bad. Do you have any examples for that? Like, if your kid has black friends and they don't really know how to have the conversation with them, or they want to be there for them, how would you love for people to show up for your children? How would you like their friends to show up for them?
So I'll let you tell the story about Stella.
So our youngest, when she was 4 and in preschool, a little boy at her preschool said that my sister, who was 6, told me not to be friends with you and not to play with you because of the color of your skin. And obviously at such a young age, they were taught that. And that crushed Stella. She's my youngest. My oldest is so outspoken and educates herself and is so confident in who she is. But because Stella had that experience, she will question, well, I don't look like you, Mom, or your skin doesn't look like my skin, I look like my dad. Or she's very curious around it. And she has friends. Like, when we had the march in Prairie Village, she had friends that showed up that marched alongside of her. That was beautiful. And she has friends that look like her in her school, and she gravitates towards them.
Yeah, I would say our oldest is the beacon of what you want this next generation, the message you want them to push forward. Like, super diverse, super sharp, understands the complexities of the issues at hand, willing to take a stand and disprove, people who are not conducive for the way we want to move forward. Diverse group of friends, all of the things you want. Our youngest, just given the fact that we moved here when she was younger, she started kindergarten here, it's a little bit more, nuanced with her for sure.
And I think the question you asked is, what do we want people to do for our kids? And I think the basic human need is everybody wants to be seen, included, valued. And so I just ask that. I just want everybody to do that. And like, when I pick my kids up from school, it's not like, how was your day today? What did you learn? The first question I ask them is, how were you kind today? And so they look for ways to be of service to people. They look for ways to show up for somebody else and to be kind. And that's all that everybody really wants, is love and respect.
Yeah. And I think there's a misnomer too that black people don't want to be placated to, and they don't want to be patronized. They want to be treated as equal, right? And that's the big misnomer, is that there should be some huge paradigm shift, and that now you should treat our kids differently or better, or no, just treat them like kids.
I think I'm seeing more like, sorry, this is going to get personal, but my niece Lola is really good friends with your oldest. Mm-hmm. And my niece Lola is an empath. just empathetic.
Mm-hmm.
And I could totally see her wanting to call her and ask her how she's doing.
Mm-hmm.
And like, if she were to ask her parents, is it okay if I call my friend and see how she's doing because there's a lot going on in the world? I can see a lot of parents saying, I don't know, that's pretty, like, let her parents handle it or something.
Well, I can say that your sister and her husband are allies in this whole thing. I can tell you that because we've had conversations.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and Avery would welcome the call.
Yeah.
And Avery would welcome the dialogue. And so I just think that, you know, every situation is different. And, you know, one thing that Caroline said to me, maybe it was a month ago or so, and it's so lost in this hyper-polarized world we live in, but is nuance. And like, there is nuance to everything. There is nuance to the conversation that needs to be had, and every single black, white, brown situation cannot be handled the same with one broad brushstroke, right? And so, you know, how we talk to our kids and how we interact with our kids may not work for everybody.
Yeah.
And there's no right, wrong. Well, I shouldn't say there's no right or wrong. The only wrong is to not do it. Like, that's the only wrong. Like, stumbling through and fumbling through and making mistakes, that's totally right and it's totally acceptable and it should be applauded.
Yeah. So the lessons here are really just for everyone. Like, show up, do the work, don't be afraid to fail. Show up the way you want to show up. Be authentic in this space. Lead by example by doing that. What else? Is there anything else you would like to add to this or to summarize or share or get out into the world?
Well, yeah, you and I and Caroline before this talked about experts.
Yes.
And how, you know, the word expert is so overused today in society, and that, yes, there are historical experts on the history of the black man's plight and how racism has impacted our country. Like, there is that. But I think where we are today, there are very few, if any, real experts in dealing with the nuanced nature of culture. Like, how people and families are being impacted by police brutality or the homogenization of black culture and how it's used to power pop culture and all these things. Like, there are people who know a lot, but there is no experts. And so I think that we all have our chance to be our quote unquote armchair expert and have dialogue with people. And I think that's important right now.
Yeah. Do you have it? I agree.
I agree. And I think people have gotten so comfortable with sticking with their people that they forget to expand their circle. And so I would just encourage people, expand your circle. Go outside of the normal people that you hang out with. Seek out differences. And ask questions. Listen. Learn.
Yeah.
That's how change will happen.
You mentioned some resources, The Conscious Kid. I always go wrong. I actually watch these. Black Man.
Uncomfortable
Conversations with the Black Man.
Worldreader.org.
Worldreader.org.
Austin Channing Brown has a TV series.
Great.
That you can Google that and find it.
Yep.
I mean, I think Viola Davis has done an amazing job on Instagram.
There's a book that's How to Talk to Kids About Racism by Yolani Memory.
Yeah.
So buy the books.
Tons of resources out there. Google it.
White Fragility, The New Jim Crow, like all of these books are set up to put people in uncomfortable spaces. But I mean, I can't tell you the number of people who have, you know, DM'd me on Instagram when I started this mission early on, just like educating people. Like, oh my gosh, I just finished that book. It was amazing. You know, and it's like so humbling where we as white people are and have come from and where we need to go. And so just start.
Yeah.
There's no right place to start. Just start.
The Love You Give. I'm going to add that as a really good book. And it's actually technically a fictional book, but I think it's a great book for like teenagers and stuff to read. You might agree or disagree, but to give some perspective on how things are handled in different communities. So, is there anything else? Good.
I think we covered it.
I think we covered it. Well, thank you so much, Todd and Caroline, for being here. Your time, I know, is precious. And so we are very grateful that you are part of the WellSky Foundation Wellness Experience. I am Sarah Buchanan. Thank you all for joining us in this conversation. I hope you have some tools that you can take home and implement. And we will see you soon. Thank you.
I'm Linda Goler-Blount, President and CEO of the Black Women's Health Imperative, the only national nonprofit organization dedicated to the health and wellness of the nation's 21 million Black women and girls. Imagine with me for a moment if we lived in a society where health equity was a reality. 2,400 fewer Black women would die from breast cancer and birth-related complications. Black infant mortality rates would drop by 35%. High school graduation rates would increase by 50%, and the poverty rate for Black women and their families would be cut in half. For the past 38 years, we've worked to achieve health equity for Black women and girls, and in just the last 5 years alone, we've invested over $20 million in programs to reduce health disparities in chronic disease, HIV, and maternal mortality. We have a bold goal to increase the number of healthy Black women from 9.5 million to 12.5 million. The donation we receive from the WellSky Foundation directly funds programming that supports Black women's rights to live happy, healthy, and long lives. Join the Black Women's Health Imperative in the movement for health equality and be the change with us. A donation to the WellSky Foundation will help many, many people live healthy lives. Thank you.